Greetings, friend, and welcome to the Between the Covers podcast, where we are working every day to remove the self-limiting beliefs that are preventing us from becoming the heroes of our own stories. I am Marcus Spar, and today, before we get into our topic, I do just want to remind you, if you are enjoying this podcast, then I would greatly appreciate it if you left a rating and a review on your favorite podcast app. If you're watching this on YouTube, then please subscribe, like the video, leave a comment. I would love to engage with you however I can. Today, I want to talk about something that really struck me when I was listening to a Robcast podcast. If you're not familiar, there's quite a few Robcast podcasts out there, but this is the one that's done by Rob Bell, who he is an ex-pastor. He used to pastor a mega church, I believe in the Michigan area, and he's kind of been a spiritual mentor of mine as I have been working through my own faith deconstruction and reconstruction and figuring out exactly what does my faith look like these days. And he had some very good things to say in a second part about kind of what we should be doing here in 2025. And the thing that really stood out to me is at one point he was talking about taking care of ourselves. I don't know, it sounds like something I say a lot. And he made a comment about how many people say that they have a guilty pleasure. Like, I listen to the Sunday School Dropouts podcast, and I've heard Dr. Laura Anderson, who's one of the co-hosts on there, share that watching The Bachelorette is one of her guilty pleasures. I know that my partner Libby, watching The Middle is a guilty pleasure. And you hear people just comment about these not even really obscure kind of media content that they take in, and they refer to it as a guilty pleasure. And Rob Bell made this very, very interesting observation, and it was just a question. Why does pleasure need to be guilty? And it really got me thinking. This is one of those things where I believe that we can really see the impact of the United States Protestant and even Puritan roots, that pleasure is not a good thing. It's almost as if we are supposed to abstain from all forms of pleasure because you're supposed to be miserable, because you're not supposed to have fun, because it's doing things that are considered worldly, and you're supposed to just work and toil and even suffer in this life in order to have true happiness in the next life, whatever that happens to look like. This is something that is very Christian when I think about the influence of Christianity in my life. One of the things that I can be grateful for about my Christian upbringing is the value of hard work and having a solid work ethic. Now, I have seen far too often that for many people, this is all that they focus on. It's all about acquiring. It's all about doing. It's all about serving. It's all about working hard. It's about sweating. It's putting your blood, sweat, and tears into whatever it is that you're working on. And you do it so much that at the end of the day, it's like you have nothing left to give. Now, I can bring up how unhelpful and even unhealthy that is If you are coming home from work and you've given all that you can at work, you have nothing to give to your friends and family afterward. That's not exactly going to foster very good and even healthy relationships. And yet, this is something that I think very much underlies this concept that pleasure needs to be guilty in some form or fashion. And I want to challenge that. Kind of like how Rob Bell posed that question. Why does pleasure have to be guilty? It's the reason why when I interview individuals for hero studies now, one of the questions that I like to ask is, what is something that you do that you just come to life while you're doing it? Because I think that is very important for us to see a wide spectrum of what are these life-giving behaviors that do help us to be better people, to relax, to express ourselves in our own unique and sometimes creative ways. I find this to be very important because, and this is maybe me being cynical here, one of the things that I do believe now is I don't believe that there is anything after this. I don't know whether there is or not. And that kind of changes my perspective on a great many things. It's not so important for me to maintain my appearance and my image of having a completely immaculate lawn. I don't worry about whether or not there are dishes in the sink or on the counter. I want to spend my time doing what is going to bring life and light to me and to others. I think about Odin. And one of the things that I have had to reframe my own perspective on, and I was even talking with a friend of mine earlier this week about this, how I have been and will slip back into these different mindsets about making sure that I help Odin expend the energies that he has so that he's not being a bother to Libby or myself. And if I look at the interactions that he and I have in that regard, then that's not the healthiest. It's a privilege for me to have Odin as a four-legged companion in my house, to be able to take care of him and be able to have the time to play with him. This is being recorded the day that a convention starts over here that I'm going to go with Libby and with our friends. And so I'm not being that much of a stickler about making sure that I am taking the time to play with Odin, because he is going to be at a kennel that he's been to a couple of times, and he's going to have a lot of fun while he is over there. So I am using my time right now to get some work done and to support my friends. And I need to remind myself quite often that it's a privilege. If it's not a privilege and it's a chore for me to play with Odin, then it becomes work. It's something that's not fun anymore. It's not something that I enjoy. Let's pose an interesting question here. What is something that you define as a guilty pleasure? Once you have that in your mind of what that guilty pleasure is, I am curious, why is it a guilty pleasure? I think about my love of video games. I still love to play video games and get into these stories. and experience these adventures. And that was something that I was guilted and shamed about a lot growing up. That I would hear from my parents how they didn't grow up with video games and they just went outside and they played, and my parents wanted me to go outside and to play just like they did growing up. I have been judged just for liking some of the things that I do enjoy. I think, wow, this is, I think, the second time this has come up in as many podcasts, that I was judged one time when I was streaming on Twitch because I like pineapple on pizza. And I know that that is very divisive for a lot of people. And yeah, oh, I think I just remember which one it was. It's the don't yuck someone else's yum. I don't judge anyone for the kind of food that they like. I don't want to be judged for the kind of food that I like. I get pleasure from having pineapple on pizza on the kind of now rare instances that I do have pizza. It's not something that I need to feel any guilt about. It's not something that I need to worry about how others are going to view me because of it. I don't want people to take away things that I find enjoyable in my life. Talking movies, video games, archery, writing. I was incredibly afraid to admit to people early on that I play Dungeons and Dragons. And some of that is because I kind of grew up during the satanic panic in the 1980s and 90s. And I remember hearing messages about how evil Dungeons and Dragons is, how satanic it is, how just disgusting the people are who play these games. It took quite a bit of work for me to process these feelings, these thoughts, and these beliefs that I had when I started playing with some people that I knew. And it turned out that Dungeons and Dragons, it's just a way of telling a story. There wasn't anything bad or evil or wrong about it. It was other people who were scared and giving into those fears that were instilling within me their value systems. And I didn't need that. I bring this up because if you do have something that you define as a guilty pleasure, there is a reason why there is guilt attached to it. And I would challenge you to see what it is about this activity that you do find pleasure with or pleasure from that is causing the guilt. Now, I do need to be careful here because I do work with quite a few individuals who struggle with some form of unwanted sexual behavior. It's a part of my story. It's what almost ruined my marriage within the first month. There are certain things that I can acknowledge are pleasurable, and yet at the same time they're not healthy for me, for my relationships. There are individuals out there who enjoy looking at pornography, and it's not something that they're feeling guilty or shamed about. They have friends and partners that are totally okay with it. Great. If that's the case, then that doesn't need to be a guilty pleasure. For me personally, though, it's something that I do find pleasure from, but I don't wish to engage with because it has caused harm to someone that I love dearly. And I don't want to sacrifice that for something like pornography. Video games, on the other hand, and the movies that I enjoy watching, and the TV shows, those I don't need to feel guilty about. I have my tastes. There are things that I enjoy. There are things that I like to take in. I like a good fantasy, swords and sorcery, Battle of the Dragons kind of story. I have loved watching Lord of the Rings. I have enjoyed watching Harry Potter. I have enjoyed watching The Last Samurai, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And I like to watch things that just make me laugh. I can't tell you how many times I have decided to sit down and watch a movie, and I'm flipping through this book of all these different DVDs, and I end up coming across the movie Flushed Away, and that's the one I end up watching. Or Robots is another one. I recently rewatched Despicable Me 2, and I love these movies. They just make me laugh. And there's nothing wrong with taking a couple of hours to sit down and watch a movie just for the pure enjoyment of it. Not everything that I do needs to be in work or progress towards a specific goal. And that's where I think a lot of this conflict that many, many people struggle with comes from. We are talking specifically about a society that looks at fun as being childish and even demeaning if you're an adult. And yet, play is so, so important. It is so important. As children, we learned about the world around us through play. It was through imagination, it was through testing boundaries and figuring out what works and what doesn't, and having others help show you what it is to engage socially. And then we become adults and suddenly that's taboo. And I don't know about you, but I have seen so many people that at the end of a work day or at the end of a work week, when I was in college, one of the things I remember seeing when I worked as a cashier and I was in a store in a pharmacy, one of the things that I saw over and over again were the people going home at the end of their workday or at the end of their work week, and they are buying beer. Like, sometimes they're buying cases of beer. And then they come in the next week and they're buying the same amount again. This is an example of what I believe to be people who have had this idea that play and pleasure are things that are not a part of the adult experience. And so they work and they work and they work and they put up with so much shit throughout the week. And then the only thing that they can do is they get to the end of the work week and their weekend is just spent on coping. Maybe that's when they sit down and they binge a TV show. Maybe that's when they buy like a case of beer and drink it all within 2 days. Maybe they're just like kids in grade school, middle school, and high school who are just trying to make it to the weekend because that's the only time they get to do anything that they deem to be fun. And they turn to things like alcohol or food, or maybe even chasing adrenaline as a means to feel better about what they had to deal with during the week. Now, I'm not saying, again, I have to be careful here. I'm not saying that consuming alcohol, that doing some of these risky activities that give you adrenaline, just so long as you're not endangering others, mind you, are bad. What I am saying is we oftentimes do not have that great of a grasp of what it is to be curious and playful in American society today, because it all needs to be moving us towards a goal. If I want to write, then I need to be writing on something that is somehow going to make money. This is even something that my friend Ben challenged me on just earlier this week. We were talking about it, and he reminded me of the value of writing for myself, not for anyone else. If I write something and I like it and I share it with others and they like it, great. But if others don't like it, that's fine too. I did it for myself. I did it to bring pleasure to my life, expressing my creativity in this fashion. When I heard Rob Bell pose that question about why does pleasure need to be guilty, that really got me thinking. And I doubt Rob is even listening to this podcast, but I do just want to thank him. Thank you, Rob, for posing this question and really getting me to think about it. I want a life, a society, I want a world that is so much more interesting and full of joy and delight, especially during a time when it seems like there's just so much hatred. And that's not to say that there aren't legitimate concerns and struggles that people are going through. The conflicts in the Middle East between Russia and Ukraine, even here in the US, with individuals that are expressing a different kind of sexuality and sexual identity, and how they're being attacked, how minorities are being attacked. There's a lot of ugliness in this world. I don't want to be someone who adds more to that. I don't want to add fuel to that fire. I want to encourage people to be compassionate and curious and to do what's right for you. If someone else is trying to force their values upon you, they might not be someone that's worth spending time with. Let's just be honest about that. I hope that today, or this week, or this year, you're able to wrestle with this same question and remove guilt from pleasure. I have had people who have been shocked when they find out that one of the podcasts that I love to listen to is the Lore podcast. And Lore dabbles in folklore that is definitely of a darker take. We're talking ghost stories, we're talking about murders, we're talking about serial killers, we're talking about darker folklore and mythology. And I guess some of that was I just had so many people in my life who just looked at me as if I was a good Christian man or whatever. And it's like, how can you like something like that? I am unapologetic about the podcast that I enjoy listening to. Lore, Myths and Legends, Misty Mountain Legends. That's one that Libby and I listen to together. I listen to Thank God I'm Atheist, White Homework. I listen to God Awful Movies. I listen to some recovery podcasts. Mike Chapman, who was on here earlier, I listen to his podcast on male survivors. And I don't need to apologize for any of that. I don't need to apologize that I listen to Sunday School Dropouts or Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. I don't need to apologize for enjoying playing games such as Phantasy Star Online, Champions of Norath, of playing Demon Souls, of playing Fields of Mystria. I don't need to apologize for any of that, because they're all things that I love, and they're all things that bring me delight and pleasure. I don't need to apologize for being friends with the people I'm friends with, whether they are queer or they're Christian. I don't need to apologize for any of that, because it's not something that I need to feel guilty about. I don't need to feel guilty about what I find attractive about Libby. I don't need to feel guilty about the company that I keep. I don't need to feel guilty about the fact that Odin has a name tag on his collar that is a bone that is colored like a rainbow. I don't need to feel guilty that my views are different from how I grew up. I don't need to be guilty about who I am. Challenge this notion that there is such a thing as guilty pleasure. Why is it guilty? Why do you find pleasure? Ask those questions and be curious, and you might be surprised about what you find beneath the surface. There might be some pages between the covers of your story that will enlighten you on why this is something that you feel you need to hide or keep a secret. I am learning more and more how it's okay to be me. It is absolutely okay to be me. And I want to encourage you to find how you can be okay with you. And until next time, live strong for today.